First of all, let me thank everybody for joining this inaugural Policing TV Roundtable, focusing today on police ICT. Really, absolutely blown away by the contributors, our panelists today. Thank you to each and every one of you. It is the inaugural Policing TV Roundtable. There will be others that follow, but it is absolutely, for me, a red letter day, and looking forward to the path that Policing TV takes from here. Our focus today on police ICT. In a moment or two, I'm going to ask each one of you, please, to give a short introduction as to why you are a panelist for this event. Then we will focus on two key elements. First of all, on the pandemic and the impact that had on police ICT and the challenges that were faced and addressed in that time. That will last approximately 30 minutes or thereabouts. I'll endeavour during that to bring each one of you in so that you each have a chance to contribute. And then we'll look forward to the future. So now that I'm sure we all hope that we're emerging from the pandemic, what is the future for police ICT? Not just in England and Wales, but in Scotland as well, and potentially wider than that. Our panelists today do come from England, Wales, and Scotland. So no further ado, let me go round in turn and ask you please to introduce yourselves. No particular order to this, but Belinda Goodwin. Belinda, could you perhaps just say a few words of introduction first?
Hello, yes, I'm Belinda Goodwin. I'm a Met police officer. I've been in for 20 years. I've been voted in as a national board member for the Police Federation of England and Wales in 2018. And what came with that was the opportunity to become the lead for Police Federation of England and Wales around wellbeing and everything that stands for within policing. So I work towards 4 pillars of wellbeing. That includes financial wellbeing, mental health wellbeing, physical wellbeing, and general wellbeing. So absolutely passionate about my colleagues within the organisation and anything that we can do to support them going forward is our number one priority. So it's all about the members for us. It's about us supporting and looking after them and, you know, challenging and negotiating with certain forces around the wellbeing and the welfare of our members.
And there were quite some impact on all officers and staff during the pandemic. We'll certainly return to that during the course of this discussion, Belinda. Thank you so much. So Ian Bell.
Good afternoon, everyone. Ian Bell, Chief Exec of the Police Digital Service, a new business that's evolved out of the Police ICT company. Hopefully many of you will be aware of that. And then I guess before that, 12 or 13 years now across varying policing roles, from service delivery to a CIO for 3 police forces across Bedfordshire, Cambridgeshire and Hertfordshire, and formerly, and the initiator of the NEP.
Thank you so much, Ian. Paul Court, please.
Good afternoon. Paul Court, I'm the Head of Digital Policing at Merseyside Police. I'm a Senior Operational Leader with 14 years experience in Merseyside. I went to the Met for 2 years during the pandemic, so my pandemic years were spent in London, and then I transferred back up to Merseyside. My background is uniform policing and organisational change, and I'm now leading the digital transformation team in Merseyside. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Paul. Russell Tilsett.
Good afternoon, everybody. And so Russell Tilsett from 8x8. We are communication partners with Virgin Media. So, and what we do is we provide communications technologies into the public sector, including policing.
Thank you so much, Russell. Remiss of me, right at the outset, please forgive me, Virgin Media Business, for not acknowledging you as the sponsors for this very first event. I'm going to blame the pre-match nerves for meaning that I skipped that particular acknowledgement. Most grateful for your support on this. Steve Hartshorn.
Steve Hartshorn from the National Federation of England and Wales. I work with Belinda, who you've already heard from, and Simon Kempton, who you will hear from. I'm currently the lead for firearms, taser and less lethal. Also chair the operational policing committee for the Federation. So looking at all aspects of frontline response work, and I'm particularly interested in how ICT can help enable policing to respond to investigations, crime, but also perhaps working with our colleagues in the detective industry as well to see what other abilities there are there to give the public the proper service that they so richly deserve. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Steve. And now to another Steve, Steve Turner, please.
Yeah, so Steve Turner, newly elected PCC this May, up in Cleveland in the northeast of England. I'm APCC lead on for serious violence, and I'm also a member of the Police ICT board.
Excellent, thank you so much. Simon Kempton, please.
Afternoon, Bernard. Hopefully you can hear me. I work with Stephen with Belinda at the National Federation, and I'm our ICT lead. I have been for a few years. And in my time in that role, I've concentrated mainly on trying to build some bridges between policing, relationships between policing and the technology sector, with a particular emphasis on reflecting the specific needs of frontline policing when it comes to ICT. And I've been privileged to be able to do some work around that that I'm looking forward to continuing. Thank you for the invite.
Thank you so much, Simon. Stephen, I can see that you have a wonderful Nottinghamshire PFCC background there. Stephen Mole, please, if you would, a few words of introduction.
Well, first of all, it's Northamptonshire, not
Which did I say? I do apologise.
I was going to say, yeah, I was going to say the PFC, the PCC for there might not be too happy. Stephen Mole,
apologies.
It's all right. Police Fire and Crime Commissioner for Northamptonshire, chair of PDS, overall enthusiastic of technology. Apologies for my slight lateness in a joy that is everybody's policing computer systems. It wouldn't let me out through it. Here in Northamptonshire, we're actually bringing together our police IT team and our fire IT team in one team under one leadership, with all the challenges that comes with. I'm glad to be here. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Anna Anderson, please.
Afternoon, everybody. I'm Anna Anderson. I work in the marketing department for Virgin Media O2 Business. I will be sort of sat here listening rather than sort of participating in the discussion, but I'm looking forward to hearing from everyone.
Thank you, Anna. And Charlotte Hales.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Charlotte Hales. I am Justice and Blue Light Lead for Virgin Media O2 Business. Until recently, I was a senior police officer. I worked for West Yorkshire and in counter-terrorism policing. And I'm really passionate about digital transformation in policing and hoping to use those skills in the private sector now to help policing.
Martin McFadgen, please.
Good afternoon, Bernard, and everyone. Thank you for attending the session. I am the head of public sector for Virgin Media Business, so it's my responsibility for running all our engagements across all public sector relationships up and down the length and breadth of the country. But a little secret for this esteemed group is that this is my kind of customer base and community that I have most personal passion and insight with, having come from a family of police officers, and I broke the mold by not joining. So it's a subject matter that is close to my heart.
Lovely, thank you, Martin. Des Oliver.
Yes, absolutely. So good afternoon, Bernard. Good afternoon, everyone. I am Des Oliver. I'm from the Cabinet Office. I work within our central commercial function in an area called Markets and Suppliers, and I'm responsible for the tech sector engagement with our strategic suppliers, and this covers IT, telecoms, space, and also cloud. The other part of the role is reaching out across central government departments, arm's length bodies, and the wider public sector, and to bring that community together as a one government approach when interfacing with the suppliers, with the intention of driving mutual value. Thanks, Bernard.
Thank you. Rich Bailey, I'm going just to introduce you. Rich is a colleague of mine who, if my internet connection gets completely banjaxed, Rich is going to step in as chair. But I am going once again. Just Joe, how are we doing with your connection? Can you now hear us? Can we now hear you?
No, I'm just going to do some work with Joe just to get her back on.
Okay, and Chris Perry. Chris, there's a couple of people marked as guests. I can't immediately tell whether it's that you are one of them, but Chris Perry, are you there? No, so okay, Chris is the CTO of Police Scotland. Joe is the Chief Constable of Durham and the NPCC digital lead. I'm going to move us on so that we can get on to the heart of that, and ask first about the pandemic. The Centre for Economics and Business Research actually found that there was an acceleration in digital transformation of around 3 years across UK organisations, with particularly fast progress amongst public services. It does seem from where I sit that UK policing responded pretty admirably to the impact of the pandemic and the need, for example, for individuals, officers and staff to, where possible, work from home. However, I'm sure that there were also some downsides as well. Ian, I'm going to come to you first, Ian Bell, as the CEO of the Police Digital Service. I know that you and your team, as the pandemic hit back in March, really did all you could to step up to the mark. What do you remember of that time, and what do you think are is the key learning from that time?
Blimey, Bernard, good question. I guess probably on the reverse is, what is there not to remember? I think it's I think for me, clearly it was a very different time. I think we were, strategically we're in I guess a period of reasonable foresight. When I look at the work that we'd already stood up, most people hopefully will be familiar with the role of the National Enabling Programme. It was a programme that had started back in 2016. I was the original program director. I think Stephen Mould was the original NEP program board member. The nature of how we wanted to begin to facilitate a journey that saw us consume, I guess, much more flexible product, much more product orientated when we looked at the nature of the services we wanted to consume, and actually wanted to do that in a very standard and common fashion. We'd already started the program. We'd seen a heck of a response from the 43 forces of England and Wales, but actually a wealth of join up with the Police Service of Northern Ireland, with Police Scotland, etc., around what we thought common adoption to this tooling could look like. And actually the pace of change, along with very busy programs of work, hadn't, I guess, at times some forces had responded really well to that, some not so. And then of course we get to March or January of 2020, and we begin to find ourselves in a very different position where we are all of a sudden deploying our workforce to be home-based where we can do. We are very rapidly running out of kit, so being able to work with brilliant folk in the commercial supply chain to make sure that we are providing devices as quickly as we can, and seeing those services prioritized to a fashion to that extent. Bernard, I'm grateful, certainly with the link that we had, not only to the supply chain, but actually, the miracle job that forces did locally, very quickly. Let's use the Met as a really good example, 55,000 users on Teams, over a short period, a very, very short period, seeing that conduct followed, that set the tone for the rest of the user base really to begin to push the nature of these tools. Saw a terrific response, and all of a sudden we had a workforce that became enabled in a very different fashion. And I think for me that is, collectively what's given the NEP the momentum to get to a position where they will close towards the end of this financial year, and in earnest be one of the first most successful national programs that we have seen policing deliver from a digital and from a tech perspective. Perversely the pandemic has helped, I think, see us transform, see us change, see us adopt more common tooling that's allowed us to set a precedent for the future, that's for sure.
It might help if I came off mute. Yes, thank you. So I'm going to come to Stephen Mould in a moment for a perspective from the board of the Police Digital Service holding PDS to account. Then I'm going to come to Belinda Goodwin for a Police Federation welfare perspective. So Stephen, a few words from you on how Police ICT and Police Digital Service measured up during the pandemic, and some learning from that, please.
I think the first thing is, like, ultimately your two most important assets in terms of taking policing forward are people and technology. And actually it's the fusion of the two and how well we leverage that that's kind of going to make the difference. It's no good having great technology that nobody uses. And I think that's actually, for me, one of the big things. The risk, and I feel sorry for some of the people that are going after us, because by me and Ian going first, that we can talk about some bits, and we'll probably use up some of the ideas. So I apologise for anyone who's after us. But actually, things like the rollout of Teams made a phenomenal impact, because people knew it was there, but actually they never really got out and thought, well, actually, what does that kind of mean? And then actually, a bit like we are all here, we can see all of these different people actually had a real positive effect on people's welfare, on the positive in the respect of that they haven't got to travel. Suddenly I can attend all these meetings. I can actually do even more in a shorter period of time. That also, though, as I say, has to be taken account as also there was effect on people's welfare, and obviously got both police and fire, and there was kind of different effects as a consequence of that. Policing had done a really good job because in terms of NEP, so that rollout of Office 365, some of those tools. Thankfully, because we were quite in quite a good position. We'd already ordered most of the kit that we needed, and that subsequent challenges we've come to kind of replace some of those in terms of COVID and some of the supply issues. But fundamentally, what it did, it gave people an excuse to try some technology that they knew was there, but they were actually very nervous of going ahead and trying. So actually, if you like, it really meant people kind of made the leap. Some of the infrastructure was already there. They made it. So from a kind of board point of view, we did some great work with the Home Office, and actually you've got some programs during COVID that have actually kind of rolled out of the Home Office into PDS, because actually also it's demonstrated its capability and things that I probably would want to talk about kind of risk to networks and cyber, but I don't want to take up all the time. I'm sure you'll probably go round again later, and I'll save something for someone else to talk about. I apologize.
Stephen, again, thank you for that. There is so much. We cannot conceivably squeeze everything in to this session. Belinda, I said I'd come to you next, as I will, and I'm then going to try to come to Joe and then on to Chris Perry. Let's see how we go. So Belinda first, if you would.
Thank you so much. Yes, I mean, God, where do we start? Certainly for myself, operational police officer, until I got voted in the National Board to do that full time. Absolutely huge, a huge transition. There was lots of police officers that could work from home, but there was lots, obviously, the frontline, they couldn't work from home. So they're in the issue. And then when we were working from home, you ended up not feeling like you're working from home. You feel like you were living at work. There was officers that we know that only had a bedroom, one bedroom to sit on, and they couldn't get away from it. So the actual impact and the isolation and the welfare issues that came with that, I think we're still feeling, and we'll still feel that for quite some time. Working from home for police officers was a kind of a dirty word, but like we've touched on before, it has become more acceptable because we had to carry on in that pandemic. But talking about technology, I mean, you're right, certainly with Teams, and we know as a federation, it enabled us to carry on and work, but therefore we were putting more hours in. I certainly have, and I know my colleagues on the call, Simon and Steve, we're working up to probably 10, 11 hours a day, as opposed to, travelling into work and coming home. So it's got loads and loads of issues, lots of impacts there. This year, our conference the theme was policing under pressure. And when we done our wellbeing session with 2 response cops, the one thing that came out of that was the technology, and was the technology that they were having to use in their force. With actually putting the crime reports on, etc., that they'd keep complaining about it. It's not working. So that kind of brought that to the forefront. And there's some work that we need to be doing around that. technology has come a long way in policing, but I still think we do seem to still have the cheaper option. I don't know why that is. It's probably because of budgets, etc., etc. But I think it's absolutely right from the fireboat that came before me, who said it's about people and technology. It's no good having great technology, we haven't got the people. We have got the people, but we haven't got great technology. I think in policing we need to do more.
Thank you, Belinda. There's some real issues in well-being, and that may in itself be a subsequent line that we explore. Martin McFadgen. So from a Virgin Media business perspective, what did you as suppliers see within the policing and wider public sector space at the time that the pandemic hit and subsequently?
Yeah, I mean, it's a broad question, that one, Bernard, but I think the initial wave that we saw from our customer community and public sector was the need to have certainty and surety of access for connectivity, because that was critically important as the underpinning infrastructure for all of the applications, all of the services that we've just talked about, whether it was Office 365 or Teams or any other service to operate on there. So there was lots of discussions with customers around guaranteeing connectivity, resilience where resilience didn't previously exist, that was now a mandatory requirement, and then looking at additional remote locations that perhaps were now being more utilised than they had been previously in the kind of pre-pandemic world. And then it came to kind of fast deployment of some of the applications and services that have been talked about. It was how quickly can we get devices, equipment and applications into the hands and desks of the people who are now working anywhere, whether that be at home in offices, whether that be head offices or remote offices. And it was a fast-paced kind of deployment and delivery of that. And there was, I think, as Stephen suggested earlier on, there was the opportunity to deploy technology that had been considered previously, that had perhaps been accelerated. And this gave the opportunity probably for Ian and the team to accelerate lots of the technology adoption that was being required and desired out there. But what we are now seeing about that accelerated delivery is there is still a legacy IT challenge. There is integration and interoperability with what was pre-existing, what was there before, and some decision points now around what do we do? Do we go wholesale into the future with what we have done in the last 12 months? Is what we've done in the last 12 months correct? Or is it a stop and take stock of what we do? And specifically in the kind of policing environment, one of the challenges that we've seen is working from home is an option for some people, but clearly there are certain jobs, policing being one, doctors and nurses and GPs and so on being another one, where it's not entirely possible to do your job working from home on back-to-back Teams meetings, as a lot of us have become accustomed to. So therefore, is that hybrid way of working, how do you support people in that mixed environment to the best of ability? Because there's different experiences, whether you're at home, in the office, out in the road. And we see that from an engineering point of view for our own field teams as well, completely different scenario. And as people now start to return to the office, that becomes even more of a focal point for us. And even just yesterday, speaking of myself, we had a team meeting across 4 different offices yesterday within Virgin Media O2, and we had some tech challenges integrating different platforms with people working from home, the challenges that we've encountered on this call today. So how can we make that user experience the best possible? Because from a policing environment, the last thing that a police officer wants is to be in a vulnerable situation, in a vulnerable environment, and for the tech not to give them the connectivity back to the people supporting them that they need to ensure their safety and deliver the job and service that they want to deliver. So all of those things coming together are where we see the conversations today, Bernard.
Thank you very much, Martin. I'll acknowledge, and just picking up on one of those last points, we also are not immune to challenges of technology. Joe, I know there are some difficulties there. Just feel free to chip in at any stage as and when your microphone is working. But in the meantime, I'm going to move on, please, to Des Oliver from a Cabinet Office perspective, and then if I may, I'm just going to move on to Paul Court. So Des first, please.
Thanks, Bernard. Yeah, it's a really interesting question, and what we've seen across both central government and the wider public sector is our partnership with key suppliers, such as colleagues from Virgin Media O2, has been really positive during the COVID pandemic. If we sort of turn the clock back a little bit to the start of lockdown, we saw things such as the Nightingale hospitals being stood up in record times, lots of collaboration between public sector groups and also suppliers in doing that. We saw good collegiate behaviour in managing demand. So where we were beginning to see spikes as various bodies were panicking and, for example, trying to acquire 10,000 iPhones and things of this nature, which effectively put huge amounts of pressure on the supply chain, we saw a lot of sort of smoothing behavior and rationalization of those kind of demands. And we managed to get through it. What we're now beginning to see, and this probably builds on what we've heard from others, is we've gone from a position of a lot of agile working to a situation now where there's far more hybrid working. And we're having colleagues both in central government, but also across arm's length bodies and the wider public sector. Some are working remotely and some are now back in offices. This produces challenges to make sure everybody has the same experience. So if you're video conferencing, how do you make sure those sort of connecting remotely have the same experience as those in the room? And the other technical feature we're beginning to see is, with a change of working practices, far greater use of video conferencing and other such technologies, it's putting huge pressure on office locations. So the capacity demands are significantly greater than they were pre-COVID. And this is a challenge that's going to have to be addressed. But I'm confident, with lots of very supportive partners such as Virgin Media, we will find solutions to these particular challenges.
Thank you very much indeed, Des. Paul, I said I'd come to you next, and after that I'm going to go to Charlotte.
Thank you. I suppose there's three observations from the pandemic, which are probably more broader ones, but I think are relevant to our ICT change. The first one was how quick we delivered change during the pandemic. And I suppose the question I have is, how do we capitalise on that imperative? So when we deliver other ICT change going forward, is how do we create that sense of urgency and necessity to deliver change? And I think the pandemic put us in a position where we needed to do that fast. I think there was a huge willingness from everyone within the organisation to make it happen. And I suppose harnessing that approach really will be something that we should learn from in terms of delivering it in the future. I think the second thing it also showed is our ability to work and deliver with partners, which has been mentioned, collaborating, adjusting processes, and again, how we harness that partnership power for future ICT, I think will be key. And I think there are lessons both in terms of delivering change fast and partnerships, which we should be taking forwards and learning from in future programs. I suppose the third one is that the pandemic really made us change our culture quite quickly. Our working practices changed quickly. They weren't really formalized in the way we did it. I think we probably just put fixes in and patches in to make things work. And I suppose that did two things. It created a culture, or changed our culture slightly in an organic way. And it probably didn't have the setting of standards which maybe we would expect in more formalized change processes. So particularly around the use of ICT outside of the work environment, where are our standards there to say what is and isn't acceptable? And that's down from very small things like the requirement to be, I suppose, clean shaven in workplace. Is it okay for me when I'm sat at home not to be? So when you talk about really sort of those micro standards are important, but then when you talk in terms of the use of ICT I think we probably didn't really nail that down in the organisations that I've worked in during the pandemic. So I think there is something around just resetting and making sure that we're comfortable with the culture and working practices we've now adopted, and I suppose to some degree formalising them.
Thank you very much, Paul. I said I'd come to Charlotte. Charlotte, you have something of a unique position, being a former officer and now working as a significant policing supplier with Virgin Media business. And so your perspective on pandemic and how, with that unique perspective, what are your thoughts?
Thanks, Bernard. Yeah, so I do have a view on both sides now, because I was a senior police officer in the pandemic. And, you know, one of the challenges that the policing colleagues will remember is our business contingency and continuity plans never accounted for a loss of resource in that environment. And there was all that fear at the beginning. What if we lose our people because of COVID? And what does that look like in terms of early stages pandemic? And that transition to software such as Microsoft Teams really not only enabled policing to continue to do what they needed to do in a virtual sense, but also really, really importantly, it was those conversations with partners and that threat and risk management, for example, multi-agency public protection arrangements, where initially people were talking on an old style conference phone, and there were so many risks with that, and that information sharing, once Teams came into play for other agencies, was a really, really important step in managing that threat and risk, and realizing that actually you didn't need to just get everybody into a room anymore, and you could do business in a different way. One of the other things I saw is a transition to more virtual engagement with the public. So, you know, having teams of police officers and police staff who were able to have contact with the public and take statements and take accounts and do things virtually in order to be as efficient as possible and best use the resource. So it's really interesting for me when, you know, Martin references specifically around hybrid working and the dynamics and the challenges of hybrid working for police officers and staff dependent upon their roles. But actually, I also think there's something about what is hybrid in terms of service to the public and interactions with partners, and how actually we can continue and expand upon those virtual options, which will make policing more efficient and effective if we consider it in a more transformational way. I think it was Belinda, for example, who mentioned about cheap and budgets and so on. And I'm really seeing the view of how important connectivity is to policing. And, you know, to me previously, it was just something that was there in the background. Technology was just something that our IT teams did. And I didn't really think about it in a transformational way. And I thought that people weren't asking the right questions. And I think that's the key here. Is my question is, you know, how do we get policing to think in a more transformational way rather than a transactional sense of we need this product, we need this solution? Actually, there's a much bigger conversation to be had here, so that it's not just a case of buy cheap, buy twice, which I have seen and experienced in policing myself, and making sure that the technology is rolled out quickly so it's not out of date, and that it meets the requirements of frontline officers who are so busy and under significant pressure, has an immense impact on their well-being and a huge impact on service to the public. But I think that investment in transformational or digital transformation rather is absolutely key to success for the future in policing. So how do we keep up that momentum for policing after those experiences in the pandemic?
Thank you very much, Charlotte. That area of transformational, I will aim for us to return to when we focus onto the future. Before we get there, though, I just do want to invite contributions from Steve, and Simon prior to our moving on. So first of all, if I may, Steve Hartshorn, your thoughts, please.
Thank you. Some really good points made there. The last speaker, I think it was Joe. For me, one of the solutions is we need proper long-term funding, because much like there's going to be an inquiry into COVID, we need an inquiry or a review of the basic comms that we had from the very beginning of the pandemic to where we are now, to make sure we've got that commonality in place, be it a preferred option for communications in the cloud to a backup option. Certainly my experience is that policing got to grips with it very quickly, but working with our partners at the Home Office, civil servant, they weren't. Talking to the government, the cross-platform, they were using Zoom, we were using Teams. Is there a way we can now have a common set platform, because this will happen again? It's not if, it's when. There's bound to be other future issues. So we need some proper long-term funding now to look at those problems of, have we got the right IT? Does it keep pace? You know, it's if you look at certain providers won't use Lenovo laptops because of where they come from. Is everyone else secure using those laptops if working with other partners? Have we got the security in place to make sure? Because I'm sure many will forget this now when we've got blended or agile working, which will hopefully become part of the norm. But then if it does happen again for another similar event, of the security process in place where we can literally switch within minutes, going back to where we were. So I'd like to see a bigger review, but also some more creativity and innovation into the areas to allow my colleagues on the front line to have the same benefits that we've all got of, can they just dial in from the middle of nowhere on a good basic phone that's got video conferencing, but also ability to view documents properly. You know, I can look at most documents on my phone, but some of them just don't open because it might be an Apple phone or an Android phone, and there is that difference in sending out certain things on the same platform. So a good review, look at the way forward, and that's it. Thank you.
Lovely, thank you, Steve. Russell, I didn't mention your name in that list of those yet to chip in, and I could see you nodding when Steve there was mentioning platform. So I'm just going to give you the opportunity now, and then move on to Steve Turner after that.
Thanks, Bernard. And yes, Steve, it's almost like you're on the payroll, 8x8 there, right? So thanks very much. We saw a couple of things, you know, and Martin McFadden mentioned waves before. So there were waves of purchasing that we saw. First being, you know, a move to Teams, which was quite prolific. And that gave substantial productivity gains. But what we also saw, and I think we're starting to see the fallout of this now, is that there were a lot of hidden productivity losses as well. And the fragmentation of platforms and the fragmentation of how we get data from those platforms and controlling those communication platforms has been one of those areas where there have been hidden losses. So, you know, and Stephen, I'll let you do the 8x8 pitch, but actually that's a lot of what we've been doing, resolving those issues and bringing all of those things back together so that the workers, you know, external workers working from home or working from an office or out on the beat, they all have access to the same communications tools, right from front office to back office. So it's kind of joining all that stuff back up has been one of the obvious things to do in the next phase, in the next wave.
Let's see if we can come on to the next phase in just a short period of time. Steve Turner, and then Simon, I'm going to come to you. Steve, what from a not just a Cleveland perspective, and acknowledging here, you know, Stephen in Northamptonshire. I think I've got it right this time. Stephen in Northamptonshire is a police and crime commissioner now in his second term. You are a police and crime commissioner just in your very first term, so starting this year. But you know, not at the time elected as a PCC, but more recently. Your thoughts on police ICT and the pandemic, please.
I think for me, Bernard, I come at it from a very different perspective. I worked at the start of the pandemic. I worked for 2 local MPs, so we were very much involved in a lot of the resilience forum discussions and things like that. And I remember the very first one, which was supposed to be a conference call, and finding it seriously odd that Cleveland Police didn't have their own conference call facility. And when they got one, it didn't work. And at the point in time, I had to give them our MP's conference call number to allow them to to distribute it so we could all have an LRF call. What was striking though was how that was resolved very, very quickly. And within a matter of weeks, we'd moved from conference calls that we were providing numbers for to their own conference calls to Teams meetings, to effectively seeing this whole digital platform appear out of nowhere. So it quite resonated with me when you suggested that we'd move forward maybe 3 years, which was a leap. And I think in Cleveland, we probably moved forward 4 or 5 within that. Now, since coming into the role, I do find, like many people who work in policing, some of the ICT quite frustrating. We do seem to be behind the curve on some things, not on others, but on some things. And I'm quite surprised at the disparity across forces. So I talked to some of my colleagues who take some IT as for granted, and I talked to others that think it's out of this world what other forces have. So and from my perspective, so whether it's an Apple product as opposed to a Windows-based product, whether it's fully integrated Outlook system and using Microsoft Office, right, to all those types of things. But I think generally, certainly here in Cleveland, we're definitely on a journey and it's definitely moving forward. What I'd like to see and what I'd like to see the discussion go to is how we can really integrate modern technology much closer. So whether that's talking about things like facial recognition, we're heavily invested in looking at an app to report crime here in Cleveland and what we do with that going forward. And I think there's a lot of cutting edge technology out there that we maybe don't look at, and because we haven't got the right infrastructure to take that forward. And that's hopefully something with the likes of my colleague Stephen on the Digital Services Board, we can look at and try and really take policing at the cutting edge. Because one of the scariest things I've heard in my time here is the criminals we're trying to catch are far more IT savvy than the officers that are trying to catch them. And that's a worrying thing, and I think it's something we need to be ahead of.
A fascinating journey there in Cleveland. I've seen recently your intentions of developing an app better to provide a service to the Cleveland community. We may get a chance to return to that, time allowing. Simon, over to you, please. Yours may be the last contribution before we move on to looking into the future, although I will try Joe again and see whether we can get Joe in on the call. But Simon, over to you.
Thank you, Bernard. I was going to come at this from a slightly different perspective, but having heard some of the contributions, I'm really encouraged, and particularly actually colleagues from Virgin Media, Martin and Charlotte. I wanted to reflect on some of the things that have been said. So policing, we're a flexible bunch. We're agile in the way that we approach things. If you give us a problem, we'll improvise and we'll adapt and we'll overcome. I'm speaking to you from a laptop that's stacked on all sorts of different things because of having to do some similar challenges, overcome some similar challenges myself. Whilst that's all positive and it's all true, we can sometimes be very slightly resistant to change. Or maybe actually the word resistant isn't the right one, maybe it's fearful of change. And what the pandemic did is it forced us to be innovative in our approach. We didn't have a choice, we had to look at different ways of doing things. Some ways perhaps had been unthinkable until last year. It was always accepted that if you were a police officer, you could not work from home. There was no way that that could be achieved. And what the pandemic showed us is there's some roles actually where that is achievable. And there's a lot of good learning from the pandemic, and it would be a shame to lose some of that innovative approach as we come out the other end of the pandemic. I don't think we will. I'm hopeful that we won't. I know of at least one force, for example, that's currently reviewing its estates as it was looking to move into a new headquarters facility. Do they still need the same facilities? Can they make that investment in different areas instead to make the money go further? So while that's all positive, it's also, I think, highlighted some gaps as well that we need to be aware of. Hardware and software, I think Steve, the PCC from Cleveland's just made the very good point. I'm a bit of a techie myself, which is why I ended up in this role for the Federation. Yet I like having the the new phone and the new tablet, but I know that most criminals, particularly those that are fairly well organised, will have better, more ready access to good IT than I have. So I think we've got an opportunity, and Martin touched on some of them, to close some of these gaps, particularly around infrastructure. What the pandemic showed us is, if you're in some of the more remote areas, you won't have the same access necessarily to high-speed broadband that facilitates that sort of agile working. And yet members of the public in those areas deserve exactly the same response from the police when they dial 999. And when we're on a meeting like this and Joe's comms are failing, it's frustrating. But that's all it is. It's a first world problem. Some elements of policing, lives are at risk, and we cannot afford to have infrastructure let us down, because members of the public, police officers, will be put at risk. And ICT is only as good as the infrastructure that underpins it and the training that we give to our people. And that's one of the things that we're going to have to take forward. I like the way that we...
Go on.
I'm ever so close, I promise. I like the way that we started to put frontline officers at the forefront of some of our policy decisions. We can't lose that. We cannot be top-down led when it comes to IT provision, because it's only as good as it works on the street. And if we get that wrong, we'll let the public down. We need to retain that approach as we go out the other side.
Simon, thank you so much. So let's look ahead, if we may. Stephen Mould, I'm going to come to you first. I know that you are pushed for time. One thing that has always struck me in my advancing number of years in working in policing is that the governance structure is a real challenge. Now, I will leave it to you to answer whether or not, I'll leave it to you to determine whether you want to come back on the spaghetti junction that is policing governance. But more broadly, but I'd just like to give you an opportunity of commenting on where next for police ICT.
I'm going to let Ian comment on some of that, but you've thrown that ball over to me. I've got to pick it up, haven't I? I actually, and I would say that, wouldn't I? Because I'm there from a local accountability for both police and fire in Northamptonshire. But actually, it needs me lightly. How do you deal with that? It can't be right that you've got 43 ways of doing things. So actually, one of the key ways of doing that for me, and Ian's bored of me talking about, is really we need a digital backbone. We need consistent systems that are ubiquitous across all police forces. And there are some, and that's particularly where it's data driven, it's intelligence. The reason I'm going off in a minute is the ESMCP board in a second. I'm kind of going off. So you've kind of got that freight train coming round there to replace the airwave. But actually that opens up some phenomenal opportunities when it's delivered right, in terms of kind of video data that's kind of personalized. But one of the things we've really got to do, we've all got to, if you like, coalesce our capability, share and dilute some of our sovereignty, and all work together. That's chiefs and PCCs. And then for the greater good, will we get a better service to the public? Because ultimately, that's what we're here to do. I mean, I myself this morning have been with our team around NAS, the capability around ANPR, and actually that ability now, the Met's done a great little product, which is kind of impossible journeys that sits on top of it, that allows you to identify clone plates. Well, you think when you start to identify things like ANPR linked to mobile phone technology, you can genuinely, bearing in mind, and I'm not park the ICO and rights for a second, and Ripper, because Joe will jump up and down on me. But actually, that fusion of ANPR and mobile phone data can make a prolific effect of safety on the public. And only where it's kind of appropriate. But my big bit is you do need local accountability, because policing needs to be different in different places. However, though, it can't be right that we should share data better. There should be consistent standards. And obviously, that's where I think PDS has an important role to play. It's better that policing does it in conjunction with the Home Office, not the Home Office doing it to policing. I hope that was a robust enough answer. Back to you, Bernard.
Thank you, Stephen. I know you need to go very shortly. Thank you very much for your time.
I must apologise because I must go to the ESMCP board because I think there's some interesting developments. So I apologise I can't stay a bit longer.
Now, just on that point, part of what Stephen said there was about integration, and I think so. My note here is that Steve, but I didn't know whether it was Steve Turner or Steve Hartshorn, made a point about integration a little earlier on. So I'm hoping either that both of you or one of you, Steve Hartshorn and Steve Turner, will jump forward and respond to how does policing ICT better integrate? There seems to be an opportunity there. And if neither one of you wishes to leap forward, I can see that Ian Bell is off mute and ready and waiting to come on in.
I, having listened to the last 15-20 minutes and some of the really well-made points, I guess the eclectic nature and the mix of where we've got autonomy that continues at times to create divergence, but also continues to bring us together in other veins. Some of the natural objective that we've got, I think having listened, Martin, your point, but Steve Hartshorn, your point really around the nature of interoperability and agreeing to begin to do stuff together. Over the last year, we've begun to make some significant inroads into some of those challenges, and whether that's with the supply chain, whether that's with ourselves, or whether that's across the law enforcement community around how we begin to join some of this up. We've been talking about the development of national standards forever, probably all the way back to 2015, depressingly, but over the last 18 months, we've seen some significant progress around the development and delivery of standards through our organisation, out into wider government, out into the supply chain, that's really beginning to push the challenge around how we generate interoperability between our systems, our services, our solutions, etc. And I think that's something that we've got real momentum around and will continue to progress. I think Charlotte made the point around, our drive to continue to consume good and proper technology, that keeps us current, that keeps us relevant. I think, there's a recognition that there's an SR around the corner, but I'm not sure the SR will be as profitable as we'd like it to be when it comes to the nature of new investments. And let's see what comes, but, one will assume at this point, it will be about continuity. It will be about strategies that continue to be in place, and if anybody's not aware of the National Digital Strategy that was launched in 2020, I'd get you to have a look at that, because we're about to come out after Christmas and engage with a new stakeholder set around what the first revision of that document will look like. That we'll have already begun to enlist a load of the challenges that you've recognised and really begin to think about how we solve some of this. But some of it will include, and Stephen's point he just made is fundamentally, how do we ask ourselves a different question around how we are going to fund the development of change through investment that allows us to endorse and adopt new technologies at the same point. It can't just keep coming from grant from a Home Office perspective, relying on the SR year after year. There's a real intent to see product like automated facial recognition come alive and be consumed in a very common fashion in the way that we've seen delivered through the Met, success that we've seen through South Wales that's not come without issue. When we look at judicial reviews and stuff that have come off of that. And I guess that leads me to Simon Kempton, your really well-made point that says, this is about the envisaged nature of how this stuff works Friday morning at 3 a.m. in the pouring rain, and people can still be able to envisage the information that they need that allows them to take the decision that they are going to take. But ultimately, how do we generate confidence back to the public in the same point? And the one thing that we are beginning to push while we think about the development of all of the strategies, all of the products that we're investing in, the national programs that are now delivering, is actually, what does the ethical framework look like that accompanies all of this, that allows us to give confidence back to the public that we are beginning to use data in the most purposeful fashion that allows us to create trust. And I think, Bernard, with all of that, if we can get that right, we're beginning to lay the foundations with new roles. I look at the developing work within PDS. We now have a chief data officer who is beginning to re-look at policy, begin to re-look at platforms, begin to work on behalf and with forces around the nature of decision making that can bring some of those capabilities together that will give us greater efficiency, greater productivity, greater pertinence within our data, that ultimately drives us to where Simon, Charlotte, Russell, Steve have all been from. Belinda primarily, you know, her perspective around the nature of our workforce and ultimately looking after them. You know, we are heading there, but it doesn't happen overnight from where we have come from such a deep legacy perspective, I guess would be my only point around managing expectation.
So thank you, Ian. Steve, you were about to chip in. After Steve Hartshorn, I'm going to come to Martin.
Yeah, thank you. For me, it just needs a form of action. We need to look at a basic operational requirement of what is the absolute basics that a PC in Northumbria would need to communicate with a PC in Devon and Cornwall. If we can solve that problem, we can solve some of the local problems. We had it to a degree with the airwave system, where I could speak from the bottom of South London to my colleague in the north of Scotland, and it worked crystal clear. And yet sometimes I couldn't talk to my colleague on the other side of the M25. So if you can resolve some of the basic issues, but for me it's about what is IT being used for. It must always be used as complementary to boots on the ground, to that physical presence of a police officer, not just when we're responding to crime, but also to see officers patrolling for that confidence in the public. So whatever we've got, that if a control room can send it out to colleagues on the beat, can they view it easily? You know, I found myself in the past couple of years, my eyesight is degrading, I'm having to wear glasses. Some of the print we send information on is minuscule. Even if you've got a magnifying glass and you're zooming on the phone, it's too small to be useful when you need to look at it quickly and professionally to make a decision which could potentially land you in court. If you've got a use of force, you've based it on something you've seen on an iPhone 8 Plus with a big screen, that's not good enough. You know, we've got officers to carry tech around with them. Can they carry it properly? Are there better resources in the local neighbourhood where they work? Because if you're in a vehicle, you can carry it.
For me,
you can't.
Carry on, Steve.
No, that's it. It's just, can we look at some of the basics which we need, and then we need action. We need the MPCC to get together, stop talking waffle, pull the fingers out, press the government for some proper long-term funding so we can invest in tech for 5 to 10 years and get us the kit that we need, that we can grow. Because as you've said, the criminal organised crime networks, they've got billions of pounds they can throw at this. EncroChat, you know, there's one example of how they got around crime. It took a long time for us to get ahead of the game in that. There's other things that we need to look at, but we need action. We get too many surveys, too much talking. Officers on the ground need the kit and equipment and the tech to support them. And until we can fix that aspect at the MPCC level, we'll always be talking about it. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. I'm going to go to Martin as flagged now, and then I want to come back to Belinda. I just want to pick up on the welfare and well-being points that is incorporated in Steve's comments there. So Martin first, please.
Yeah, thanks, Bernard. And I think I touched on the interoperability piece a little bit earlier on in the respect at the pace at which technology and new services and applications were deployed and the challenges that then created, but kind of were worked through during the last kind of 12, 18 months or so. And it's now that people are taking stock to say what is actually required in terms of customer delivery, customer being the kind of service of kind of policing and safety for citizens and communities in this environment, and what's the expectation. And if we reflect on what's happened in the health sector recently around all of the GP appointments being all virtual appointments, to now last week's announcement of funding available to get GP appointments back to being face-to-face for a kind of realistic balance of what the public require and are looking for from that public service, then that's the important part here, I think, is understanding how do you deliver what is expected by the public in a coherent, joined up, consistent manner. And I'll make no apology for as my accent says anyway, I worked through the kind of coming together of 8 police forces to 1 with Police Scotland, and there was the kind of phrase coined there that they didn't want it to be Taggart or Hamish Macbeth being kind of the kind of policing experience in the wrong part of the country. They wanted to maintain that level of engagement and experience that they had been used to. And why should it be different because of where you live? It shouldn't be substandard. Based on the area of the country that you live in, and even so that's a kind of comparative with health. I can draw comparisons with the education sector as well. We discussed with a number of education organisations recently that Well, the pandemic's taught us that actually in years gone past, when it's heavy snowfall in certain parts of the country, schools would close, kids would have days at home building snowmen and going out sledging. But actually, has this taught us that the school could continue and there's no need for the schools to close down for days or weeks during that period? Quite possibly. So is there, I think one of the points made earlier on about the accepting and adapting the ways of working, but putting some structure and rigor around that says, maybe perhaps to Ian's point about a national standard of what is acceptable, because having people working 12, 14, 16-hour days because they're at home, isn't right. And it's not good for people's health and safety to do that. And it's not delivering the service that is required. But legacy systems can be a determining factor on being able to adopt some of that future technology. So funding, coming back to the point and kind of closing out here, Bernard, I think a critically important point is having an agreed funding programme that allows a drains up review of what legacy IT is still there, that is preventing not just the adoption and delivery of services that we expect today, like Teams, but if we want to move to what I'll refer to as futuristic vision of some of the automatic facial recognition and points that have been discussed by some of the colleagues involved in these initiatives, futuristic to me, is that capable? Is that possible on the legacy IT estate that still exists and is a barrier to current day technology being delivered? I'm not sure it is. So therefore, I think that's where, again, some national standards about minimum requirements is probably not a bad starting point. So
I said I'd come to Belinda next, which I will. Then Steve Turner, I'll come to you. It's slightly unfair on my part in that you've only just relatively recently been elected as the PCC, but I'd just like to touch on the funding side with you, and then Ian Bell, come back to you if I may, just on standards. So with Belinda first, your thoughts on the related welfare issues that have been acknowledged in the last two contributions.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I completely and utterly agree. I think it's got to be a minimum standard. I think that's throughout policing, no matter what we're talking about. If we're talking about mental health provision, we're talking about uniform, equipment, etc., etc. Cops want good technology. They want the technology that will support them to do their job and do their job well and go out and protect the public. We talk about, facial recognition, talk about drones, you talk about, cops want that. But what we're seeing on the front line and the policing under pressure is that it is a postcode lottery. There is 43 different ways or there's different systems that forces will use for putting a crime report on, for instance. We're still at the stage where you'll go to a domestic incident and there's children present and you're putting a crime report on, and then you have to create another crime report to then capture what the children witnessed. Then there's another report there for maybe if you had to put the door in, and there's a report, etc., etc. We need to invest, and Charlotte's right. We need to really invest and meet the requirements of what is needed on day-to-day policing. We need to look at 21st century policing and see what are our officers going to be dealing with. What's the demand? You talk about COVID, the pandemic. Our demand went so low because people were indoors, people weren't going out. Then it went to an all-time high with regards to the protests, the rioting, public order incidents, unlicensed music events, etc., etc. Our cops got, they got assaulted on a day-to-day basis. So the welfare and the well-being of them officers, they will go out and they'll run towards danger. But when they come back, the straw that breaks the camel's back is the word processor that doesn't work, or the computer that they can't get to work. This is what they're facing on a day-to-day basis, and we need to get a grip of that.
So a part of fixing even those small but they're not small, enormously frustrating problems is to get more money into the system. Now, Steve, This, I know, I'll acknowledge again, Steve Turner, that you're only relatively recently elected. You don't have a magic wand in your back pocket. What do you think the potential is for, policing getting more funding for police ICT, if indeed that's needed, in order to sort out some of these challenges that we've been hearing about?
I think there is a magic wand, and I think it comes in the proposed powers of general competence for PCCs. And it's one of the things where, when you look at the few PCCs that have responsibility for fire, and you talk about fire governments, and fire services up and down the country do have powers of competence, general powers of competence, that allows them to be a little bit more financially active. And what you tend to find in a lot of fire brigades, that they're a bit more flush with cash. And I know that's very generic and it's probably unfair on some, but that is something that comes across. I personally believe that as we move forward, by allowing police forces to have, and PCCs to have, general powers of competence, there is a lot of investment we can make. There's a lot of estate out there that's been sold off for effectively peanuts, because there was no way that Air Force could do anything with it. Whereas with the right investment, we could have seen significant improvements in the force. Now, I'm not saying all of that is ring fenced around ICT, but one of the reasons for giving general powers of competence to PCCs is to improve the welfare and crime, and for the benefit of all. And I am fully in agreement that we do need that investment in ICT, and that investment will give a better service to the residents we serve. And whether that's quicker making statements, whether that's more accurate statements, whether that's digital statements, whether that keeps police officers on the front line more because they've got the right equipment to be able to do that. And maybe as IT gets better, we cut some of the red tape out because we've become more reliant on it and more trusting on it. But that is where I think the magic wand comes, because what we'll all see in funding generally, not just in the police force, but across the country in every aspect of life, is we have to take into account that the last year has been unprecedented. The last 18 months has been unprecedented, with things like the furlough scheme and the job retention scheme and the business loan schemes, and all of the things we've had to put in place to basically, in some respects, keep people alive, to keep people moving, and to try and give us an economy to go back to. That's going to take an awful long time to pull that back around. So there certainly isn't going to be a magic bullet anytime soon that says, right, we recognise we need to invest in police ICT. There's a few million extra quid each. That's not going to happen. But well-regulated, well-managed general powers of competence for PCCs will allow us to think innovatively and think outside of the box when it comes to what areas of force we can invest in.
Do you know, Steve, that's a more encouraging answer than I expected it to be. So thank you for that.
I'm a glass half full person.
Excellent. And hopefully it'll become even more than half full. Ian, I said I'd come to you next. I'm mindful of time, and we are coming shortly to a close. So, but you might want to pick up on element of funding, but also on standards as well, I think was the area that I was keen that you come back on. I am keen after that to give Paul, Simon and Charlotte an opportunity to, in particular. Russell, I know that you're there as well. I keep missing your name off the list. I do apologise. So Ian, on a response to Steve's point, perhaps plus standards. So over to you, Ian, please.
So I'm with Steve. Everybody knows, Bernard, I am ever the optimist when it comes to improving the capability with investment that's gone before that hopefully sets a precedent for investment that might follow, because we seem to have been progressing in the right direction. And having Steve on our board, is a real plus for me, for people to come in, to see new PCCs. To encourage a like of thinking between themselves, complement that with the chiefs that we have on our board, and the development of the organisation and the thinking that exists within it. It's down to us to put good, honest and proper investment case and proposal and recommendation together that allows us I guess, to create some synchronization across policing when it comes to look at the capability of where we want to invest in for common good for the future. And so I'm all for that, you know, and that's what our team is here to do, to put some hard work into drawing those proposals and bringing them forward. As Steve says, you know what, we can take the begging bowl, we can take whatever we like, you know, we all have to think differently around how we do that to recognise those opportunities, but so be it. Let's put our thinking caps on, because we know the purpose of why we need to do it. I guess ultimately then, Bernard, from a standards perspective, and I shared the link in the chat, you know, that we can share publicly after this around all of the work that's going into standards, you know, that is really aiming to attempt, I guess, to increase efficiency, increase productivity, align, I guess, from a more corporate perspective, you know, where we are with some of our policies. You know, we've got a lot of work to do from a policy perspective that helps keep toe with the nature of change from a tech perspective at the same point, but we don't want that to inhibit. And I guess, you know, picking up on some of the other points, you know, whether it's about device selection, whether it's about the nature of a design, somehow we've got to create headroom and capacity within our IT teams. You know, we look at the investment that we're making in cloud. Now, I think somebody made the recognition that we want to be able to look at documents on the fly. We want to be able to adjust them. We want to be able to respond from wherever we might be, you know, and be that on our phones, be that on our laptops, be that on our tablets. That capability is there. That capability exists. And so we have to ask ourselves, if we can't do that, why can't we do it? You know, the nature of being able to consume common product, you know, and let's use Office 365 or Microsoft 365 as a good example. You know, my team now have a responsibility as the NEP closes to continue to refresh evergreen design. So that means that, you know, when product is changing and cloud product changes all of the time, when is the right time to create a new set of designs that can be handed to forces for forces to then go and consume and to keep their products up to date in the way that we do that? And Belinda, you're absolutely right, but the product set is changing all of the time. So how can we make sure, you know, Steve Hartshaw made the point about the interoperability piece, Teams platforms, Zoom platforms being able to communicate. Well, we're seeing those integrations happen from those US corporate perspectives, but those changes have to be implemented. They have to be taken on board in the way that we use that through our forces and through our change life cycles in the way that we use those products. It's not just as simple as, from a security perspective, pressing the button and all updates being allowed to download and occur, because that would be awfully reckless and with no control whatsoever.
Thank you, Ian. Paul, I'm going to come to you first, then to Russell. Paul, from a Merseyside perspective, your thoughts, or indeed more widely.
I'll probably make a few points, and I'm obviously keen that we get technology into the hands of officers. Clearly, that's where the benefit lies, officers and staff. I think the first point I'd make is that in order to land the technology, we need to increase the digital competence and confidence of the workforce. And I think that is a piece of work that still needs developing, both at the fundamental level with advanced or specialist skills, and then at a leadership level as well. And when I talk about leadership, I'm not necessarily talking about how to use the tech, but actually how to lead digital transformation programs is going to become a key aspect. So I think there is a piece of work around the digital competence and confidence at those sort of three levels. We've seen that the NHS has run the campaign #Data Saves Lives. And I think that really highlights the importance of sharing data within the public sector. And I think from a policing point of view, we spoke before around officers having to update different pieces of information at the conclusion of a domestic incident. What I'd say is, what access do officers have to the right information when they're attending the domestic information that is wider than simply just what we hold on Merseyside databases? What do our partners know, and what are they willing to be able to share with us so that we're fully informed when we attend? So that actually the provision that we put in place doesn't just solely relate to a policing response, but actually a wider partnership response.
Go on, carry on.
And then I suppose my final point from a Merseyside perspective is, I'm keen to work with, we talk in policing around most similar forces, and actually understanding our digitally most similar forces, so that we're not collaborating solely with people on a geographical basis, i.e. Northwest forces are coming together. If we don't share the same infrastructure, that can sometimes be a challenge and a hindrance. So actually understanding the digital landscape across the country, so we've got our digitally most similar forces, then will help in collaboration whilst we continue to have a model which has 43 forces operating in those 43 different ways.
The most similar forces key point. I am, however, coming over to Russell now. Feel free to pick up on the most similar forces, Russell, but I'm intrigued by Paul's point there about wider agencies and integration beyond policing. If you wish to comment on that, I'd be very interested. Otherwise, it's a more general invitation to you. I am then going to come to Simon and finally Belinda to you. Sorry, I beg your pardon, to Charlotte to close. So, but first, Russell, to you, please.
Yeah. So on that point, Bernard, I think interoperability between agencies is something that we see is really important too, and it is extremely important to have the right security framework and making the right security decisions when considering how to go about doing that. So I think, by the way, it's great to see that there's a digital strategy from that covers the next 10 years. I think that's exactly the right thing to be be doing. Yeah, the threats have changed in even the last 5 years. That we face as a country, as free people. So security is absolutely critical and is probably the first thing to consider, particularly when. And let's be honest, there have been lots of moves to cloud technologies. So what that is involved is extending the perimeter of trust. NHS have been very reticent in the past to do this, or rather, let's say they've been, they've had to really think about how to extend the perimeter of trust into cloud. And so that's been, agreeing a set of common standards is the way, the way to go about that. We've certainly seen that. And part of our job as one of the suppliers is to help you by being ahead of the game, and being aware of those threats in real time, and integrating those into our security policies. So
very helpful, thank you. And so Simon, going to come to you, and then Charlotte to you in closing.
Thank you, Bernard. I won't labour points that have already been made. It's unhelpful. I would touch very briefly on interoperability before moving on. The point's already been well made. We're on the eve of the largest ever movement of policing in UK history, as several thousand officers head north to Glasgow for to support the operation for the UN Climate Conference. And I've been involved in that planning, and we've had to make compromises on our planning assumptions because of interoperability, which isn't something that we should accept, even where it's necessary. I wouldn't want us to see a position where we've only got individual suppliers to the sector. I think competition engenders innovation, but certainly those suppliers should be persuaded or encouraged to ensure that their products are interoperable at the point of entering the market. One thing that I would touch on very, very briefly because of the time is training. I don't think it's something that was necessarily mentioned today. 20 years ago, when I joined the police, I was trained in how to give crime prevention advice if someone's shed was broken into, along the lines of put a padlock on your shed. The world's changed since then. So much crime is now cyber enabled. We're not just talking about high value cross-border frauds. We're talking about simple thefts where the thief disposes of the property via an online marketplace. And we need to make sure that our training of officers keeps up with that, so that we can give the public the service that they need, so we can help protect the public the way we protect them when we're talking about their shed being broken into. And that's somewhere that we're perhaps being slightly left behind. We've got some incredible, unbelievably talented individuals in some cybercrime units, particularly the regional units up and down the country. They do an amazing job. Where we need to put some focus is your average Bobby on the street who maybe doesn't come from a background where they're as comfortable with technology, and we need to make sure they are comfortable with technology so they can do the job for the public.
in so many ways, this last hour and a bit has raised more questions than it's offered answers, and something that we will need to pick up on in future. You mentioned, Simon, for the first time, I think, in the last hour and a bit, the word training. That is, of course, absolutely fundamental. Charlotte, I'm going to come to you. We have a couple of minutes left. To you, the opportunity either to add or to reflect on this event, for which I'm most grateful for Virgin Media Business's support. Really is very much appreciated. But your reflections, perhaps, just in a couple of minutes, if you would, on what we've heard this last hour and a bit.
Yeah, thanks, Bernard. So there's been so many fantastic points made, and as you say, it raises a lot more questions than it gives answers. But the important thing is that we are having these conversations, and I think there's a recognition from everyone about just how important this subject is, and just sort of reflecting on conversation about what is happening at Police Digital Service on that national level around standards, but then equally thinking about what Paul said in respect of digital competence and confidence within policing, and that digital leadership within policing. I'm thinking from my view in a new role at Virgin Media O2 is around security and around helping policing have trust and confidence in Virgin Media, and trust and confidence in suppliers to help them through that journey. And, you know, trust and confidence is something that policing talks about all the time. And when I joined Virgin Media O2, that's the conversation that they're having, trust and confidence of customers. So there's that really strong link with us wanting to support digital transformation. I think looking at where we're at now, I see so many transformation opportunities that doesn't require a great deal of work for policing. I think there's so many things that can enhance our public service now in terms of, you know, contact methods, how officers and staff are engaging with the public, you know, reducing the means or the need to travel in all instances, so that the police officers, who are a finite resource, can do as much as they can with the time that they have. And then there's that longer term view, things that we might aspire to, where the days of, it's not just in movies where drones show up to a scene or an incident before police officers can get there in order to assist in dealing with that situation. There is that conversation about facial recognition, which really interests me, and the wider conversation that needs to be had about those things. So considering, for example, you know, the legislation states that somebody's arrested and can have their fingerprints and their DNA taken and their photograph taken. Well, it's how that photograph is used in the future to enhance facial recognition and build that database in the same way that we have a DNA database. And similarly, it's how civil aviation allows the use of drones to an extent that it could really revolutionize how policing interacts with the public, and how that technology can enhance what they do and make them as efficient and effective as possible. So that's just my thoughts, Bernard, there.
Thank you so much, Charlotte. I'm sorry slightly to rush you right at the very end there. This has been, for my part, an absolutely fascinating discussion over this last hour and a bit. I was a little nervous, more than a little nervous earlier in the day with this being the inaugural Policing TV event. It's gone fabulously well. I'm very grateful to each and every contributor. There are so many things here that we really must return to. My thanks again to Virgin Media Business for their wonderful support, really very much appreciated. In closing, thank you all. This recording will be available shortly for others to see, and there are some great contributions for others to be picking up on. Thank you so much. Thank you.